Brigadoon Radio with our good friend Gerald Ashley, coming to us from sunny England. Gerald, how is it going?
Well, 2 or 3 days of sunshine in England, and we get newspaper headlines of, tropical conditions, heat wave, meltdown. For people who don't know where the temperature really is, in old money, it's probably about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And
that sounds perfect. That sounds like Southern California. Sounds great.
But England, this is almost the end of the world in terms of the huge amount of heat we're suffering from. So it's actually nice weather, and we've had 5 days of it, and that's probably been summer, but it's probably going to go now. So there.
Well, my favorite summer is in Scotland, where it's 65 and rainy. That's like my favorite kind of summer.
Really?
Yeah, put on a nice sweater, go for a walkabout.
So, given your favorite country, do you want to go and live in Vancouver or somewhere like that?
I've actually never been to Vancouver, but I hear it's lovely.
It's beautiful, but it's always raining.
Yeah. Well, I like a bit of rain. I don't like constant rain. I like weather though. I like things that change. I don't like. I've lived in Southern California, and literally it's nearly 75 every day and perfect. And I don't know. It can become a bit monotonous. It's fun to have a little storm here and there and see some weather.
It's the sort of weather equivalent of Stepford Wives after a while, isn't it? It's almost sinister that it's exactly the same every day.
Yeah. But I will say, growing up in Michigan and where it's, could be 32 below in February, there's something to be said about some nice sunshine in late February.
Don't knock it, I think they say.
All right, here we go. We're going to try something new. We've got, as you know, we've got our favorite flashcards. So what we're going to do is just pick out of the box randomly, and we'll see what happens first. All the excitement. Here we go. Oh, my God. Voting. So it's good. We got some good elections that happened. We got the French. We had a by-election. We had an election in Colombia, which is pretty exciting. And, we got a forthcoming election in Brazil in October, I think. Obviously here in the U.S. in November. Do you want to talk about our friend Macron and what is happening in Paris?
Oh, yes. Le Petit Empereur. He's had a bit of a setback in global domination.
The sun god has been, is it over for the sun god?
Yes, there's a bit of cloudy weather on the horizon. And I think you viewers and listeners who will recall we had the political and economic analyst Helen Thomas on at the time of the first election in the presidential elections, the first round. And even then we started using the dreaded word of cohabitation, which in English really comes down to one party having a presidency and the opposition in some form having the parliament or the assembly, National Assembly. But it's a little bit more interesting than even that, because the National Assembly is quite an interesting crew now. It's made up of pretty hard left and some fairly radical groups on one side under Mélenchon. And Madame Le Pen is very much on the right. I mean, the mainstream media over here have been saying Mélenchon is now the man that's going to control things. But it's worth noting that Madame Le Pen went from, I think, 8 seats to 80 seats. So it's a kind of fractious sort of parliament. And I just wonder if that will slow things up in France. We shall see.
Yeah, obviously, I'm not a French expert, but from my understanding is the president has a lot of power, and it was kind of designed that way, and more or less the National Assembly is a rubber stamp. But I don't know, maybe having divided government is good. Here in the States, when we've had divided government, like that is who controls the White House versus the Capitol, there seems to be more productivity or more better operations. So maybe it'll be good for France.
Yeah, you've got what I always think is a good idea is to keep politicians out of the way. So if we could just ship them off to Antarctica for 2 or 3 years, we'd probably all be a lot better off. Right.
So maybe not getting anything done is a positive. I mean, what other legislation does France need, actually?
Yeah, I mean, these guys have been, like in the UK and the States, we've been passing legislation for 200 years. And you do wonder, what on earth is there left to do, or why it's so badly drafted each time? I think the thing about the French thing, you're right. I mean, the president has a lot of executive power, much more so in the United States, far more than a prime minister in the UK. But I think it just becomes tricky in some areas. I mean, one of the areas to watch, I think, is going to be France's relationship with the EU, because both the wings in the National Assembly are not at all fans of the EU.
Right.
And we'll just see how that plays out. And obviously, I think Macron's plan to be sort of king of Europe, takes a slight backward step with this. He's not going to dominate the scene in quite the way he would like to, I would think.
Well, I have to think, and getting back to, I think, is it, a reflection of, the French electorate wanting to send a message to Macron, or did the leftists really have a very successful election? Here in this hemisphere, Gustavo Petro is going to take over. He won the Colombian election. He's actually the first leftist president ever of that country, and the vice president is an environmental activist. I mean, it's a huge win for the progressives and the left wing of the world. I don't know. Is that where the politics is going because of inflation, energy? Is this?
You're going to get
2 elections. Do we have a trend?
I wonder if we're going to get a form of left-wing nationalism, which is where people say things like, this is our oil, and we're not giving it away to multinationals at low levels. So obviously we've seen all this sort of thing play out in Venezuela, but you may see in other countries that are energy rich become much more nationalistic, perhaps, about that energy.
It is interesting about this. I haven't thought about that kind of left-wing nationalism, because one of Petro's ideas is to be a leader in kind of green energy, sustainability, and kind of harness the resources of South America for their own good, and the development of kind of like second wave energy. I don't know. That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about this idea of kind of nationalism, whether it's right or left. There's definitely going to be a rise of it. Every nation's really competing on their own, becoming more isolationist.
It also gets funded, with oil over $100 a barrel. Money is flowing back into the economy. So you take the example, let's take Venezuela, which people forget is got the largest reserves in the world, bigger than Saudi. When it was down in $25 barrel territory, they were suffering. I would have thought they've got a large amount of money flowing in now, and that tends to prompt more sort of radical action by those sort of outfits. I know it's difficult to say in Venezuela whether they're left wing or right wing, but they're certainly very nationalistic.
Yeah.
And, so it's not a new game for the multinational oil companies, but they're back right in the middle of geopolitics yet again. In fact, if you or I were running Shell or BP or one of the Exxon or one of the big Americans, the big pressure over the last few years has been the green revolution and technology and all that. I wonder if the pressure's now going to be back on geopolitics and security of supply of oil. Because politicians are changing their tune on this, I think.
Well, yeah, and you're wondering if, there's been, obviously energy and inflation is happening everywhere, right? It's not limited to one branch of government or one system of government or one nation. And it'll be interesting, I think, for me to see what impact Colombia has on the Brazilian election. Brazil is a majorly important economy, drives the entire South America. What impact will this have, if any, on that election? I think that's going to be something to watch.
Yeah, we're going to have a Brazil show in the future, and we're looking for sponsors to do it from Rio, obviously.
Or Sao Paulo. One of my favorite bars, as an aside, is in Sao Paulo. It's a Brazilian jazz bar at the Hotel Fasano.
Why am I not surprised at your name checking there?
You got to have, you got to have options, and it's part of my hemisphere. I need to spend more time in this hemisphere, which we don't do as Americans. All right. Should we go back to the grab bag?
Yeah.
What do you feel like talking about? How about we talk about, do we care? Do we want to talk about second order effects again? This is a topic we talked about, Ukraine and some of the outlying problems that were going to come from this election.
Yeah, and I think we felt quite happy that our second order view, I think it was back in March, a lot of this has unfolded. And Well, let's quickly start with Ukraine. Everybody thought it was going to be a blitzkrieg, and it's turned out to be trench warfare. I mean, increasingly, the Russians are edging forward, but that's all they're doing. But they are edging forward. And I think both sides are using heavier and heavier weapons. And to me, in general, as you know, I'm not a military type, but it's starting to look a bit bogged down. And the geopolitical risk to me is that Putin ups the ante and uses chemical weapons. And that I think then we all worry. And then in the background, just in case nobody has been watching it, in our first episode we talked about Kaliningrad, the old Königsberg,
right.
And the Lithuanian government have chucked a rather big brick in the pool by saying that they're going to restrict certain transshipments from Russia to Kaliningrad through their territory because of EU sanctions. To me, that's quite a frightening thing, actually. I mean, are they really going to stop this, or more to the point, is Mr. Putin going to have a word and say, "Do that again, and we'll fire guns"? I don't know. In a way, I think it's quite a serious issue.
We're getting back to, and I think we talked about this from the beginning. I mean, neither one of us thought this was going to be a quick conflict. 10 months, if not 10 years. It's already been going on for 8. So it seems to be dragging out. Nobody's really moving. It is staggering the amount of equipment that's flowing in there. The U.S. is committing another $45 million to the project. I think here in the States, you're actually going to see more and more people asking, where's this money going? We're at $50 billion already. What is this money all about? Where is it going? Who's getting it? It seems to be a political black box.
And where are those dollars really going? And of course, there's a lot of dollars flowing to Putin because of the oil price.
Right. And then you're right. I said the Lithuanian situation, I'm optimistic and hopeful that this was not done unilaterally, that the Lithuanians decided to do this in concert with, speaking with folks in Berlin, London, Paris, and DC.
Well,
they were going to raise this up.
You hope so, don't you? Good grief. The other
there does seem to be pressure growing every day. Like, how do we find settlement in this situation? I mean, clearly this can't go on.
When we looked at second order effects, we looked at fertilizer and food and all the rest of it. And that is definitely coming up the agenda big time in North Africa, where there's clearly problems. And the other element, which I think you mentioned before, and I think you got the bullseye on this, is that if you're the Ukrainians, your only card really is to play the information game. It's almost a PR war.
Yeah.
And I don't know in the States, but certainly in the UK, Ukraine is starting to slip down the news agenda a little bit.
No, 100%.
And it's certainly not number one. And, Zelensky kind of bashes away every day, and why wouldn't he, on television? But I think he's falling on less interested ears. I wouldn't say deaf ears, but I think people are going, hey, it's Ukraine. And also, if we want to look for some baddies in the world, which is always fun, I think Wall Street just want to wrap this all up. The markets want to say, look, we're fed up with Ukraine. It's screwing everything up here. We need to, the world economy's got to get back to some sort of stability. So there's all those pressures going on in the background as well, I think.
No, 100%. The old sage, Mr. 99-year-old himself, Henry Kissinger, a few weeks ago was like, we got to find a resolution on this. The CEO of VW famously said a few weeks ago, hey, man, this is like hurting the world economy. This isn't great. This is not good for business. You're seeing more of that. I saw Zelensky this week meet with actor-director Ben Stiller in Ukraine, which I just found, it's one thing for diplomats and heads of state to visit with Zelensky, but now we've got actors that are finding their ways there. I feel for the Ukrainians. There's a story here in the DC press about the sheer amount of money that they're spending on lobbying, hiring various folks to keep this front and center. They're definitely in a tough situation, but it's impacting the entire world. And it's not unreasonable for other actors in this global economy to say to Ukraine and to Russia, hey, man, let's find a way to settle this.
Yeah, and we still don't know where Putin's favorite end game is. I mean, it's quite. Lots of people think it's still the control of Odessa and the Black Sea ports and all the rest of it. That's a little bit out of the news at the moment. But if Ukraine becomes landlocked, I think in many ways, their economy is stuffed, because how do you move all these millions of tons of grain just by train?
Exactly.
You end up with some sort of economic accommodation with Russia for access to the ports. So there's still a lot to play for in this. But you're right, it's a long game, and at the moment, it's kind of one of those slightly dull draws. I mean, that's a terrible way to put it. It's, this is people's lives and things, but it's kind of settling into a trench, to me, a sort of trench warfare situation. But we'll see, I guess.
We'll see. I think we're not really going to, we're going to see nothing in the short term, but I think this lingers on a bit longer. I agree with you. Okay, let's go back to the Magic Cup. I'm not looking.
Not looking this time.
I was going to do energy, but we kind of talked about that.
Yeah.
Psyops. Yeah, I actually like to talk about this. You did bring that up, this idea about this PR warfare. The Psyops of it is interesting. Is this the first grand information warfare technology battle we've seen? There's reports that the Russians are attacking all kinds of stuff, hacking, making noise. And this idea of like Zelensky every day, he's meeting with some group to get his cause out there. The information warfare is unprecedented in my mind.
Sure. And we're back to another of our favorite topics is, what is the realpolitik? What are the back channels that are really going on? Are the Americans saying to the Russians, look, if things get really hot and heavy, we can close down your power grid. We always worried that it's the other way around, that we're going to wake up one morning and the lights don't come on. But I don't doubt, the United States is a technological leader in all this stuff. You might say there's a close rival with China, but nevertheless, the US is a formidable, enemy, if you like, or adversary.
Ally. We're for freedom. We're for, we're the good guys here.
Yeah, here we go. You've got the white hats on. And fair enough, but I mean, you've also got the technological lead. And if America wants to shut somebody down, I still believe they can do it. And
I agree. I was at a book event a few years ago with Mike Morrell, who was tied with the CIA. I think he was deputy director, and he was talking about hacks. And he said quite cavalierly, he's like, "You got to know, America's stuff is really, really good." Is the way he said it, like in a very confident, like don't sweat it, like we know what the hell we're doing, and to the point where he was like, I won't even plug in my toaster, which you think about this, like you're just like, Jesus Christ, you're so tied in. And
I mean, as much as we like to criticize everybody and everything, I think it's reasonable to say that although there must be wastage in the US defense budget, a lot of serious hard dollars have created a lot of serious hard kit, and that must be a pressure point for the Russians. So if you're Putin, that you maybe poke America so far with a sharp stick, but no further. And that may be the story for the rest of the year. Do we find a point at which, it actually becomes really serious? And maybe we haven't got there yet. Yeah,
and there's even any kind of disruption. There was a pipeline, obviously the gas pipeline, the Continental Pipeline situation. Seems to be, it's definitely a hack there to give some kind of bounty to, get free, and any kind of disruption or any kind of, kind of chemical malpractice or disruption to any energy part of the grid, you automatically now think, oh, is this some kind of hack? Are we being,
one vulnerability for Europe in all of this is the transatlantic cables. Obviously we've got a lot of satellite technology these days, but I think it's true to say that Western Europe is still very cable dependent. And you may remember, or some people may remember, a story a few years ago now where a freighter, it wasn't a military action, severed a cable near Egypt, and it caused all sorts of internet problems all the way down to Australia. So all these interconnections, there are vulnerabilities on both sides, but and then the other Psyops point, which seems to have gone away, is there was a big campaign to say that Putin was ill and that he was on his last legs and he'd soon be gone. That seems to have faded away. And maybe the feeling was they weren't getting the Russian domestic audience buy into that, or they couldn't get to the Russian domestic audience. I don't know, but we'll see.
Well, and there's a great story. There was a story in the Times yesterday. Kremlin, quote, rebranding war in Ukraine as officials banish Z symbol, which is quite interesting. And obviously, I love communications. I've always been quite interested in propaganda and getting people to do stuff and nudging and whatnot. And I don't know, this stuff's quite fascinating. I know it's horrific what's happening, but all these governments are competing with attention. How do you keep a domestic audience engaged? How do you keep an international audience engaged?
I wonder if there's a parallel with the Vietnam War, where the Vietnam War, obviously, we had these scenes on the nightly news, and it wore down the American public. So, I don't want my son going there and all the rest of it.
Well, I think what's quite interesting is like we don't really see that kind of footage, at least here in the States. We're not seeing like kind of frontline photography or video. And I think both sides, the Russians and Ukrainians, have done a good job of keeping journalists away from the front lines. Yeah. And we get these random reports leaking out and random photos, but it's not the classic kind of, there's no journalists, to my knowledge, that are embedded with these forces.
No, and it tends to be the same sort of theme of David versus Goliath.
Right.
So we get lots of, fascinating film, grim in other ways, of guys with shoulder-held missiles who are blowing up tanks and things. But the Ukrainians are not gaining ground.
Yeah.
And that maybe they just feel better doing that style of asymmetric warfare. But there must be more going on than just that, obviously. But as you say, we don't see the reports.
Yeah, we both know a war is happening, and I think actually there's a think tank in the UK, is it the International Studies or ISI, and I think the British Defense Department has actually done a good job of providing kind of daily recaps, but there's no photography, there's no video, there's no audio. It's quite interesting to see these kind of very, formulaic, direct, basic, one-dimensional reports.
Isn't this a little bit like the First World War? Parallels are not always sensible, but it's trench warfare, and there was no real-time coverage as such. There were films that came out a few weeks later, always heavily edited. And at the end of the day, it turned out that it was just a sort of street fight slugging match that went on for years and years. And, maybe the same here.
Yeah, both of us have said, like this war doesn't really make a lot of sense for the 21st century, but it's very reminiscent of the 20th or maybe even the 19th century. I mean, it's a bit of a throwback war for sure. Okay, should we go back to the cup? The cup of truth, the cup of justice. What do you feel like talking about?
Will we get a nice one? Let's see what comes out now.
Sports television. Do you have any interest talking about this?
Well, let's give it the proper title, of course, which is Money. It's nothing to do with sport at all. You and I disagree on this a lot, I'm just indifferent to it, and I know you're hyper excited by all this stuff. I don't know which is the one that is either the most exciting or most damaging, but as not a sports nut, I find the golf situation very interesting. The sheer amount of money involved is just it. The Phil Mickelson's going to make a couple of $100 million or something. I mean,
guaranteed, just to play golf 8 times, 8 times 3, 24 times a year.
Do you know, I had golf lessons as a teenager, and I wish I'd stuck at it a bit longer now. It just, we've seen it. The classic example has been the Premier League, where money came in and it completely changed the game. English football isn't English football now. It's football played in England, which is kind of different. And you'll correct me if I've got this wrong, but is it Apple who are going to put a load of money into US soccer?
Yeah, correct. So, no, you're spot on. Like last year, there was that idea about the Super League being launched, where you say the 20 best teams in Europe just play independent of the national leagues. And there's this huge idea of fandom. And you're right. I mean, the Premier League is just English. It's football played in England, but it's a global sport. And it's interesting that somehow my fandom for Manchester United is less because I live in the US as opposed to somebody who lives in Manchester. And we're seeing that all over sports. I mean, all these leagues are desperate to go global. Last night with the NBA draft here in the States, there's 32 kids picked, 64, I guess, between the 2 rounds. I don't know, probably a third of those kids were from Europe, which is fantastic. The rookie of the year in the National Hockey League is from Germany, which I'm like staggered.
Really?
The best future player in the NHL is from Germany.
It's got a lesson for the wider economy.
Yeah,
Because
100%.
certainly-
Just the globalization, the reach, and some kid from Germany becoming the best hockey player is fantastic.
The old days when I started my career in banking, a competition was everybody in the UK. There may have been a few people from overseas, but now it's a global competition. If you want to get into a graduate entry of a big, law firm or investment bank or whatever, the pool of potential people now is kind of frightening, actually. I certainly wouldn't have got through the door. And
you'd be in the top. I disagree. You're in the top 15,000, minds of the world. That's pretty good.
Sure, absolutely. You must be my agent one day. But I think that competitive edge that money brings, you can't deny that. It is the ultimate motivator. This has got spin-off, as you say, in other industries because, people said, oh, well, I don't have to go into the office anymore. I can work from home. Well, maybe there are people who can work from home in India or Estonia or Thailand who can do it equally as well as you, but for, 20% of the cost.
Yeah.
And I think that's coming down the road at some point.
And getting back to the Apple deal is quite interesting. So Apple's going to spend $2.5 billion to support Major League Soccer, which on any given ranking is probably only the 15th best league in the world. It's not even the top 10 soccer league. But the people that support MLS here in the U.S. tend to be educated, high affluent. They love Apple products. So this Apple deal is going to give all the kit, all the watches, the iPads, the iPhones, all this stuff to the players and teams, and they're going to stream every match on Apple television. So it's really quite interesting because this soccer league is going to leave traditional television and just go to the cloud to broadcast their games. That's quite interesting.
What do you do if you're one of the terrestrial TV companies like ABC or the BBC or any of these guys? How do you bid against this sort of amounts of money? I mean,
correct.
Because you can't deliver the audience. Again, I know I always turn things back to finance or money, but this is analogous to how IPOs happen. When you do an IPO, you want to go somewhere where they can deliver the investors. Now, in this case, you're delivering the audience. It's not the 50,000 people in the stadium. It's the 50 million people on iPhones or whatever, 500 million probably.
And it's also a reminder that Apple is in a race to bring more need for their products, right? Like, I need more Apple products so I can watch the soccer or watch these television shows. It's an interesting dynamic where before they would launch a product, leave it up to the end user to figure out how to use it. Now they're like creating hooks to like get you. The only way you can use this content or view this content is through the product.
They've always been a sort of closed system. It took a long time for them to open up to Microsoft products and all the rest of it. And they're like Bloomberg. They're a closed system. But if you can get a monopoly on the right content, I mean, who else is going to be able to? If I want to watch a main MLS game now anywhere, it's going to have to be via Apple, isn't it? There's no
correct. Yeah.
So
our good friend Chad Munich works for FC Cincinnati. So you need to adopt. If you're going to adopt the MLS team, Gerald, I suggest you pick FC Cincinnati.
Well, I have to admit, I've never been to Cincinnati. I don't know if I want to go or not, but I'm heavily influenced by the Steve McQueen film, The Cincinnati Kid. So
there you go. It's all coming together. MLS, Apple, soccer, Steve McQueen. There you go.
All the stars are becoming aligned.
Well, should we do one more topic, or should we do reading and watching?
Reading and watching. Well, I'll go first. And
here we go. Reading and watching, our favorite segment.
And another one off a bookshelf, which I have read again not many years ago. I think it was given a birthday present a couple of years ago. It's a semi-famous book from 1932. I like to keep up with things. It's by a British diplomat with a great name called Duff Cooper, and he's written what is considered the definitive book on the French Prime Minister, we're back to France again, of Talleyrand. And Talleyrand's a very interesting character because he went all the way through the revolution, all the way through the Bonaparte era and out the other side. And he changed sides about 5 or 6 times. And in a way, it's a good read, and his skill, his diplomatic skill in steering around revolutions, victories, and defeats. And it may also be a bit of a primer for those of us who are continually mystified by how France works. And I think what comes out about France is it's like a lot of things, it's a collection of very strong special interests, and it takes a special person to be able to ride all those horses at the same time. You could say de Gaulle did it for a period of time, though in the end he came unstuck. And clearly, Monsieur Macron, that is his reason for being in politics. But it does show that France is not an easy country to manage. And so, although this is all about the events of 210, 220 years ago, a lot of it, as is always in these cases, echoes back to where we are now. So yeah, it's a good read. And it's light. It's not one of these dull, heavy history books. It's a light book.
Well, I think France it's a consequential country. It's been super important for our nation. There's only 2 paintings in the House of Representatives. One of them is the French General Lafayette, which is pretty telling. I think we're still living in a very kind of French world. Obviously we live respectively, but you can't escape Napoleon. I think we're just 200 plus years from just recently from Waterloo. So it's quite. I think that sounds like a great book.
And it's always been a pivotal country because, there's always been this business of its relationship with the rest of Europe, and indeed its colonies. And in many ways, its colonies are much more still colonies than certainly the British or very much the Dutch experience, or Portugal, where it's all faded away, and Spain. But France, in a way, is still got a colonial edge to some of these things. In terms of, I haven't been watching anything because I've been lounging around in Cornwall, which is a nice sort of holiday destination. And I thought we could put up on the show notes another long-term theme to watch, which is the steady rise of fine dining in parts of, seaside Britain. And Cornwall's a good example of this. People who, viewers of the UK will obviously know a guy called Rick Stein, who's he's built quite a big empire in Padstow, but he's not alone. He's having a sort of catalytic effect of other sort of Michelin star restaurants opening along the sort of Cornish coastline. And so I was a bit surprised. This is another quiz night question, how many Michelin star restaurants are in Cornwall? 20 years ago, people would have fallen about laughing. The answer is 42. Now, I don't know how many there are in London, but that's a serious number of Michelin star restaurants. So if global warming continues, maybe Cornwall is the new south of France. It gets better weather and it has decent food. So there you go.
Yeah, I've only heard wonderful things there. I don't know if I've actually been to Cornwall proper, but no, it sounds delightful. I know the G8, G20. I don't know what was there last year.
Yeah,
Boris had a big conference there.
Had a pre-COVID bash there, didn't he? It was in 2019, and they just kind of pranced about on the beach and issued lots of very important statements, which nobody can remember, not even the people who wrote them or read them out. Which is one last little point about French politics is, I'm of the view we have far too many summits. We forget that summits, we need to have a tax on them or something. The first summit, I think, was in 73 or 74, and it was at Fontainebleau, and it was a reaction, it must have been 74, it was a reaction to the oil shock and the fact that this is when G7 got going. And in a way, it's always good to talk and get people together. But do you not think we have too many of these now?
Well, we're about to next week. I think we got the NATO summit. We've got a G7 summit in Germany.
These things are not summits; they're minor hills, in my view. They're big.
You're so. I'm pro summit. I like nothing better than a hotel lobby bar to sort out diplomacy.
Yes, of course.
Well, here's what my next book is going to be: Sonic Boom. which is about Warner Brothers.
Oh, right.
The history of Warner Brothers, from Hendrix to Prince to Madonna, Fleetwood Mac. So this is kind of like when records were great and fun, and I don't know, looking forward to that. I've always been a big fan. I've gotten into vinyl reluctantly. My buddies bought me a turntable a year ago, and
We're talking about the film studios were Burbank, weren't they? And did they have recording studios there as well? I've got.
Well, they did, but most of the record, like Capitol Records, get that iconic building in Hollywood, which is on the other side of the hill. Hollywood and Vine, and nothing better than a good rock and roll story. And I've never really understood the record business. It seems super sexy. It doesn't seem very profitable, especially for the artist. But it should be a good book.
One segue into that, it's coming up. The BBC are doing a special. I think it's a 4-parter in July on 60 years of the Rolling Stones. So that's one.
I see, Nick, they're still touring. It's unbelievable.
They're playing Italy this week, so they've managed to get to Italy, and we haven't.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Last one before we go. So I'm watching a little show. It's about this restaurant in Freedom, Maine. It's called The Lost Kitchen. It's a little episodic series. I'll put a link to it. But The Lost Kitchen, interesting restaurant. It's in Freedom, Maine. It's about 90 minutes north of Portland. So it's way the hell up there. It's in the middle of nowhere. And it's quite interesting. She runs only about 8 to 12 weeks because the season is essentially summer through early fall. She does 4 meals a week. Only serves 40 people. It's highly recommended. Amazing food. But the only way you can get a reservation is you actually have to send a postcard to Freedom, Maine, and they do a drawing. They do a random drawing, and they say, "Hey, do you want to have dinner?" And you pick your date and you go from there. But it's amazing what chefs are doing now. I think you're right. I mean, to have like a world-class restaurant in the middle of nowhere, Maine, it's quite interesting. It's amazing what these chefs are doing, and frankly, I'm always blown away about how inexpensive it is to eat world-class food. I mean, to go to this restaurant is only $200 plus money for a nice bottle of wine, but it's pretty amazing.
It is, and it says something to the quality of food that's been produced, in terms of ingredients and all the rest of it. And maybe that's a good spin-off from the sort of green revolution. But so I love the idea. I have to send a postcard in and hope to come out in a draw.
That's great because they interview people. They get like multiple thousands, like 10, 20,000 postcards. And, people do them 2-3 times a year and they randomly get selected. And it's kind of cool. All right. So on our bucket, Cornwall for a Michelin star. We're going to go to Maine. Got to get you down to Cincinnati. So we got a lot of planning to do. And of course, we're still waiting for our friends.
I know the problem now. It's the Italian summer holidays.
Oh, yeah, of course.
We're stuffed now until at least the middle of September, I reckon.
We'll have to wait till September. So maybe we need to pivot. Maybe we should focus our attention on a local television show in Cincinnati.
Yeah, it's Cincinnati or Copenhagen or both, I reckon.
I love it. Cincinnati, Copenhagen, or what not Cornwall?
There you go. What more? Let's go.
Open. All right, Gerald, great to see you, buddy. We'll see you in a few weeks.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Take care.
Ciao.